I beg to move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. I call Dr. Andrew Murrison.
Madam Deputy Speaker, very grateful for this opportunity. I should start by declaring my interest as a reservist, father of 2 service women, and the brother of a serving admiral. Among the many issues that should be keeping ministers awake at night are 2 tech-based conundrums that particularly worry me. One is future access to critical minerals and their products, which I've spoken about in the past. The other related is the patchy nature of the protection of these islands against missiles and drones. That's what I want to raise this evening. Now, everything costs, and it's easy when you're not in government to wish the ends without the means. At the moment, defence is spread too thinly, and what I'm suggesting will spread it even more thinly. Whether the UK should be globally deployable or focus on the defence of the homeland and its Euro-Atlantic neighbourhood is moot. The likelihood is we'll soldier on, make do and mend, we always have, but the scene is set for the biggest retrenchment since Suez. I wish it was otherwise, but it does fall to this government to make the call. Its attempted unforced surrender of the Chagos Islands is perhaps an indication of where its thinking lies. In 1963, the 35th US President told his National Security Council that European NATO members were not paying their fair share. JFK said, "We've been very generous to Europe, and it is now time to look out for ourselves." On Monday, the 45th and 47th President is likely to be saying the same thing. Clearly, American frustration with Europe enjoying the insurance policy without paying the premium is nothing new. What is new is American willingness to strong-arm Europe into changing its ways. Forget 2%, forget 2.5%. Trump is saying he wants 5% of GDP spent on defence by all NATO members. And here's the kicker. He wants 20% tariff on all goods imported to the US. Combine the two, and it's not a stretch to imagine him slapping tariffs on European goods unless Europeans step up to the plate. Ultimately, the single most important reason Trump can do what we fear he's about to do is that America is no longer principally competing with Europe's proximate threat, Russia. A vast but thinly populated nation of 144 million, a busted economy, and a military whose weaknesses have been generously displayed for all to see since February 2022, isn't perceived by Washington as a main threat. And America, emerging from the 9/11 Bush counterterrorism era, is backing off to facing off with great powers once again. But the great power isn't Russia, the great power is China. As the US pivots, European states of all sizes must step up to defend their homeland and safeguard the North Atlantic. There are no free passes. Now, Israel is a small state, but its military capabilities are unmatched in the Middle East. Its layered missile defence systems, famously Iron Dome, David's Sling and Arrow, and its formidable fleet of aircraft demonstrate how small states, with a little help from their friends, can punch way above their weight. Several of those small states will provide the first line of defence against Putin's Russia. The bulk of the cruise, ballistic and hypersonic missiles that Putin would fire at Britain as a proxy for the US will be intercepted by existing defence systems and fighter aircraft stationed in the Baltic states, the Czech Republic, Slovakia or Poland. Whilst our geography, as so often in our history, gives strategic depth and protection from long-range attack, we can have less confidence in dealing with proximate threats from sea and subsea platforms and with threats to deployed and overseas assets such as Cyprus that fall well within the scope of short-range missiles and drones from Russia, Iran and their proxies. In any event, some missiles directed at the homeland would right now get through in the event of a full-on attack by the Russian Federation. That has been our blind spot. Now, the public would expect that missiles evading the first line of integrated missile defence would be destroyed closer to their target. The T-45, the Type 45 mounted Sea Viper and the ground-based Sky Sabre are exquisite examples of air and missile defence systems. But there are simply not enough of them. Not enough missiles ready to go and not enough industrial capacity to enable resilience in anything more than the very short term. Russia's war on Ukraine has helpfully made us very alive to our vulnerability. And Russia, as we've seen in Ukraine and throughout its history, is capable of taking long-term pain where it seems unlikely we would. As things stand, the capital is particularly vulnerable to Russian missile attack unless you want to park all of your T-type 45s, those that are operational, on the Thames. Happily, unlike Israel and Ukraine, we are surrounded by friends. It makes sense to be a full part of and a contributor to NATO integrated air and missile defence. But European IAMD and its suppression and destruction of enemy air defences systems are currently completely reliant on the US. In any event, the suspicion is that a full-on attack by Russia would right now find too many holes in the patchy architecture that has evolved to protect against missiles. Germany has recognised the threat. It has owned the consequences of doing nothing. It has established the European Sky Shield Initiative and has begun procuring trusted systems such as Patriot and Arrow 3. The UK has been considering joining ESSI. Where are we with that? What about off-the-shelf systems such as Arrow 3? Ukraine has shown... Yes, I will give way.
Thank my honourable and gallant friend for that point. It's interesting that the Arrow 3 system that he talks about is a joint project between Boeing in America and the Israeli defence machinery. Is there something in an innovation offered by Patria, a Finnish company? They are offering to help us build armoured vehicles here in Britain, but based on their design. Is perhaps what we need less of a reliance on domestic systems and, as he says himself, a look at off-the-shelf systems perhaps from elsewhere?
Yeah, I think there's a great deal in what my honourable friend has to say. I think off-the-shelf historically has proved to be somewhat more cost-effective than designing exquisite systems of our own. So I hope very much that as we go further into this process, and I'd be very interested in the Minister's thoughts on ESSI, we can partner with others to ensure that what we buy is both integrated and cost-effective. Now, Ukraine has shown the limitations of a just-in-time, not just-in-case policy that has driven our failure to stockpile the material of war in recent decades. In the 1930s, the Shadow Factories Initiative fitted commercial premises that were typically producing cars for reconfiguration, should the need arise, as it did, as armament factories. Car workers would switch to become the basis of a skilled workforce necessary to create material for prosecuting the war effort. That then happened, to the point that in 1940, this country was outstripping Germany in the production of fighter aircraft. With every respect due to the few, the Battle of Britain was won in Britain's factories and on its production lines as much as in the skies. Victory hinges on logistics just as much now, except timelines are far shorter. The defence ecosystem in the US 2022 National Defence Strategy had more than a whiff of the 1930s in advancing an intertwined commercial military cooperative. In a good light, you can see shadow factories in the thematic approach to missile defence taken by DSTL's Missile Defence Centre. Crucially, it is industry partner-based, with a heavy focus on growing suitably qualified and experienced people, of which we are desperately short. The MDC is now 20 years old. What assessment has the Minister made of it, and what changes does he propose to its structure and remit to help plug holes in our missile defence architecture? In the light of prevailing circumstances, will he consider upgrading the MDC so that it has salience and clout approaching that of the pre-war Directorate of Aeronautical Production? Then it was Spitfires and Hurricanes. Today it's missile defence, SDED and drones. Then it was preparation for the total war to come. Now, God willing, it's deterrence. Now, there are those who say that the solution to our vulnerability to missile attack from the east is simple. It's Israel's Iron Dome, the close-in element of the layered missile defence system used successfully to thwart Iran in April. But Israel is a small country with a small population concentrated in a small number of cities with limited CNI. It is surrounded by hostiles. None of that, happily, applies here. Madam Deputy Speaker, our missile defence must be fully integrated with NATO partners. NATO needs European leadership as the US pivots. And we must not encourage those whose primary interest in defence lies in extending the remit of the institutions of the European Union rather than the defence and security of Europeans. We do not need the distraction of a separate, competing EU defence architecture. NATO is our strength and our stay, and we must use our status as the continent's leading military power to ensure that it remains so. Hear, hear. In particular, we must articulate clearly the case for layered missile defence and ESTED within a NATO construct as the US pivots towards the Indo-Pacific. The UK and Europe needs NATO integrated air and missile defence that incorporates close-in systems to guarantee major centres of population, defence assets and critical national infrastructure. Crucially, Member States must not give an aggressor capable of waging an attritional war grounds for believing the West will exhaust its ordnance in the first few hours or days. Where are we with the versatile and scalable, very short to medium-range modular ground-based air defence system envisaged by NATO defence ministers at their meeting in October 2020? What application might it have to provide the last arrow in our quiver that will destroy missiles that have evaded intermediate layers and are about to land on critical sites in the UK? For a country with no money, directed energy weapons offer a potential solution for dealing with drones and missiles, albeit in line of sight and albeit in good weather. Is the STL's Dragonfire weapon still on course for service with the Royal Navy in 2027? And what export opportunities are ministers exploring? Do ministers expect Type 26, Type 31 and any Type 32s will carry Dragonfire or successor directed energy weapons? Will they be fitted as standard or as expensive retrofits? Do we really need a 6th generation manned or even hybrid fast jet to replace Typhoon? Would it not be better to rely on the F-35 airframe with midlife upgrades in a future that is surely progressively unmanned? The lineal, if less romantic, descendants of the few will be tech geeks, gamers, coders, and those who provide a human interface with AI. What are we doing to grow them? And will the Minister visit the #TechTrowbridge initiative I started in Wiltshire's county town? Once a centre for Spitfire manufacture, he would be warmly welcomed on his way to his constituency. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, the reason a grisly artillery war has played out in Ukraine is because nobody has been able to command the airspace. Happily and to our surprise, Russia has been unable to suppress or destroy Ukraine's air defences. In the future, unmanned combat aerial vehicles configured to suit the Archer, not the Arrow, will do that. I would be very surprised if Lord Robertson was not casting a critical eye over GCAP and if he isn't comparing and contrasting cost and effectiveness with UCAV. I appreciate the deep cultural difficulty of envisaging an unmanned future battle space. It is deeply unsettling for those of us steeped in the traditions of the armed forces. But whilst there will always be a need for sufficient booted and spurred combat troops ready to close and kill the enemy and to hold the ground, and I am not for one moment, as the Member of Parliament for a garrison town, suggesting a further reduction in headcount, this country will never again be able to expose itself to attritional warfare of the sort we are seeing being played out in Ukraine. Politically, societally, that would be impossible, unconscionable. That means integrated missile defence. It means ESTED. It means drones, and it means command of the electromagnetic spectrum. Once again, at a dreadnought crossroads, Britain must configure the forces at its disposal for the long term in all domains and take a lead as the principal military power still in its Euro-Atlantic voisinage. Early pointers suggesting that this government is taking the right fork in the road but include difficult and unpopular decisions, such as standing firm on the deep space advanced radar capability envisaged for Cawdor Barracks on the St David's Peninsula, bottled by previous governments. As we chop to an unmanned future, it would, for example, and very painfully, include consignment of the RAF Red Arrows aero acrobatics team to the historic flight. This government has 4 years left to run, the time the Directorate of Aeronautical Production had to fit this country with what it needed to prevail. Recent events have revealed the fundamental truth that we, as then, are vulnerable. Shifting plates geopolitically will likely make us more so. The public will never forgive an administration of whatever colour that muddles through, leaving open to the predations of Putin's advancing missile programme.
I call the Minister, Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the right honourable gentleman opposite for calling this debate and for the seriousness in which he has approached it. I share his general context that we live, his analysis of the context that we live in a more difficult, unsettled and challenging set of times. That is the reason why, upon coming to office, the Prime Minister commissioned Lord Robertson to begin the Strategic Defence Review and to look at our capabilities and set those against the threats that we're facing as a country. And I'll return to some of those areas, and indeed the questions the right honourable gentleman has asked. There is a real challenge when it comes to integrated air and missile defence, when it comes to the threats from drones, when it comes from the threats of one-way effectors and long-range strike. It is something that we've seen every single day in Ukraine, with the brave people of Ukraine being on the receiving end of onslaughts from Putin's illegal invasion. It is lessons that we are seeking to learn in the Strategic Defence Review to make sure that we can not only support our friends in Ukraine with the equipment they need, but also be able to make sure that we are adapting our own ways of war fighting and defending to deter aggression, if at all possible, but defeat it if necessary. Now, the honourable gentleman's raised a number of issues, and I'll come to those in my remarks if I can, but I'm certain he will hold me honest if I've missed any by the time I reach the end of my response to him. I think his context about the political challenges to this debate is certainly true, and it is something that certainly when he was a defence minister and I was sat on the opposite side of the chamber as I am now, it was an argument being made by the current Defence Secretary and myself then. We argued, having heard it from this dispatch box, that defence had been hollowed out and underfunded, that we needed a different approach. I don't like the approach that the member mentioned about make do and mend we always have. I recognise it, but I don't think we should accept it, especially in more difficult times. It's precisely because of that the SDR needs to be bold, and that is effectively the commission given to Lord Robertson, Fiona Hill and Richard Barrons by the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary. And he is right, it does fall to this government to make those decisions. And we have already made a number of decisions in terms of retiring old platforms, sometimes difficult, and he raises the interesting challenge of how do you renew technologies without offending or without upsetting the established norms. It is the reason why Watchkeeper, as an example, a 14-year-old drone system used by the British Army, has been retired because it can't keep pace with the modern challenges of EW jamming and other things that we would be asking it to do if it were deployed on a front line. So it's certainly something that we feel incredibly strongly about. I've just returned from the E5 Defence Ministers meeting that took place in Warsaw in Poland, and it's clear to me that our NATO allies, are all taking integrated air and missile defence seriously. And if you look at the experiences of those nations on NATO's eastern flank, Poland, the Baltic states in particular, the ones that the right honourable gentleman mentioned, we're seeing that very real concern around protection of their airspace being built up in terms of what they are seeking to procure and how they're asking for support from allies in providing that protective bubble over their countries. Britain's island geography may have deterred aggressors throughout much of our history, but it's no shield against sophisticated weapons and modern air warfare. It is for that reason that the SDR has been commissioned. And that's happy to.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair, and I thank the Minister for giving way, and also to my right honourable and gallant friend for bringing this important debate to the Chamber. From discussions that the Minister has had at the E5 conference, do our allies have confidence that we are playing our part in air defence?
Well, I thank my fellow Devon MP for that question. I think he will be able to read the joint statement published by not only the UK, but Italy, France, Germany and Poland, the conclusion of this on the Ministry of Defence website. It was a point that I made very clearly in the press conference afterwards, that the UK is calling for all NATO partners to increase their defence spending. We have a plan to increase our defence spending from 2.3 to 2.5%. And what we spend any increased defence spending on does matter, because it not only needs to be able to deter aggression, it needs to be able to defeat it, and perhaps most importantly, and relevant to this debate, it needs to be interoperable with our allies to make sure that any investment in defence has an increase in our deployability and our lethality as we fight together. Because it is the assumption of this government, with a NATO first, declared NATO first policy, that we will be supporting our NATO allies in terms of any defensive measures. It's indeed the reason that we have the British Army in Estonia with Operation Kabrit. It is the reason that we have NATO air policing in a variety of states along NATO's eastern flank. But integrated air missile defence is an area that I think all NATO members need to develop on. There is not an answer that everyone has not reached for yet. It is a difficult, wicked problem that does require investment. It does require a change in strategy, and that is part of the reason why that's being addressed by the SDR that's taking place. I hope that was a long answer to his question, but I hope that provides him with the clarity that he needs. Happy to.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for giving way. He represents a city and a football club that are very close to my heart. I also thank the Honourable Member for bringing forward this important debate. I'm heartened to hear that the Minister is viewing the interoperability of our workforce and our assets alongside our NATO allies. Can you tell me, does the government view the defence of UK airspace not singularly, but as I do, as the Western Front of European air defence?
Well, can I thank him for that question, and certainly any discussion around Plymouth Argyle and a post-Wayne Rooney world, I'm very happy to take it up with him further afterwards. It's certainly true that the United Kingdom's commitment to NATO is not just in securing a northern and western flank, so to speak, and dealing with the North Atlantic and the High North. We also have responsibilities to our NATO allies on the eastern flank and indeed the southern flank as well. And part of the challenge that we have with integrated air and missile defence and the threats that the UK and our allies face is that the definitions of what is the close and the deep have fundamentally changed because of the experience of the Ukraine war. Now, I recognise there are members in this House in this debate who served in our armed forces, and they will be familiar with the broad definitions of close and deep. It is certainly true that what we previously regarded as close and what we regard as deep has fundamentally changed. The distances have increased enormously. We're seeing that in Ukraine, and that means we have to reimagine and redefine what strategies and capabilities we need to be able to operate in those environments. And having the ability to project power at distance and project fire at distance is one of the reasons why we have supported Ukraine with so many weapon systems. It is also the reason why the SDR is looking in particular at this area about how any forces and capabilities can meet the threat that we're facing. And in that respect, I hope he'll understand that that the SDR will publish much of the answers to his broad question about where we get to. But our responsibilities are more than just securing the UK homeland, it's supporting our allies, and indeed it's our allies' roles to not only support their own country, but also to support their NATO partners, including the UK as well. I mean, the threats posed to our security are continuing to proliferate and converge, with technologies rapidly developing. Protecting Britain and our allies from attacks becomes ever more complex and challenging. Let me be absolutely clear, though, in this debate, that adversaries must be in no doubt that the UK possesses formidable capabilities contributing to our integrated air missile defence, along with the will and the intent to protect the UK and our allies. We have Typhoon aircraft on alert 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and I'm sure the right honourable gentleman has seen the quick reaction aircraft, as I have, out of RAF Lossiemouth, and seen the incredible speed and dedication and professionalism of our teams there to be able to respond to threats approaching the United Kingdom. Our radar at RAF Fylingdales provides continuous early warning against ballistic missiles, and the Royal Navy has proved the effectiveness of the Type 45 destroyer against different air threats during the recent operations in the Red Sea in particular, and that includes shooting down drones similar to those used by Russia against Ukraine. In relation to the specifics of what capabilities we have, I have had the privilege of visiting UK forces stationed forward in Poland using the Sky Sabre system, supporting the NATO logistics hub that supports so much of the support we provide to Ukraine. Operation Stifftail has now concluded. That mission has been a success, and I thank all those members of the Royal Artillery in particular who have supported that mission. The Sky Sabre system that was in Poland has been returned to the UK and is being reconstituted. The Sky Sabre system that we have in the Falklands provides continuous air defence to the islands, protecting the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. And having seen that system up close and personal on my recent visit to the Falklands, I can also thank those members of our armed forces that are protecting the skies above the Falklands. We will need to ensure that integrated air missile defence is more than just a bubble over Poland and protection of the Falklands. And that is, I think, at the heart of what the right honourable gentleman is seeking to raise in this debate. It's also one of the challenges that the Strategic Defence Review is seeking to answer. Now, I won't steal Lord Robertson's sandwiches in terms of what I expect to see in the Strategic Defence Review, but certainly the enhancing our capabilities to meet the threats is one of those core challenges of the SDR, and I would expect him and his review team to be making recommendations about how that should be done when the SDR is published in the spring. He will also be familiar, I'm certain, that the time on the path to get to 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence will also be published in the spring. And hopefully that will enable us to look at those two parts together to make sure that we are, in his words, meeting the challenge of stepping up. I agree with him, there are no free passes. And we have, as a nation, relied on our strategic depth for a great many years, but we cannot rely on that alone today, and that is why our capabilities need to match that. Our NATO-first approach means not only ensuring that we can protect our own homeland, delivering on the Article 3 responsibilities in the NATO treaty, but also Article 5 and be able to support our NATO allies as well. That's why we will continue to support our deployments around the NATO area of operations. And as a country, we're also leading the way with initiatives like Diamond, which is delivering integrated air and missile operational network defences. Diamond will improve air defence integration across Europe and strengthen NATO's air and missile protection. And the UK has also launched the NATO Multinational Procurement Initiative on missile capabilities. This is a catalyst to mobilise the Euro-Atlantic defence industry in support of Ukraine and address the burgeoning security threat to NATO members as well. And we're forging deeper relations with individual European partners. Members in this debate may have seen the landmark Trinity House agreement that was signed between the United Kingdom and Germany, which will see us turbocharge a series of major projects across air, land and sea, working in partnership to strengthen air defences and to better protect European airspace. We're also working more closely with France, most recently with us signing a letter of intent for the European long-range strike approach, the ELSA initiative at France's request. These initiatives demonstrate our determination to support Ukraine, counter the threat posed by Putin and reconnect Britain internationally. Madam Deputy Speaker, I realise I haven't got to every one of the right honourable gentleman's points, but if he will forgive me, I will write to him and place a letter in the House so all members can be certain of this. But let me be absolutely clear. I look forward to seeing the Strategic Defence Review published and having it in such a way that it's not only Labour's defence policy, but it can be supported on a cross-party basis to be Britain's defence policy to secure our nation, our values and our allies in more uncertain times. Thank you.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Order, order.